How many times do you sometimes feel played by God? How many times do you feel like, the thing that you prayed for, when it comes to our relationship with God, you're like, God, for real? This is not what I had in mind when I was asking for that. You prayed for one thing, but then it doesn't really turn out to be what you really wanted. Am I getting somewhere? Or you thought it doesn't turn out to be the thing that you thought it should be. When I asked you for a house, that's not what I really had in mind. What I thought was, a house in Runda or Karen. That is fully furnished and it has this long driveway. We sort of have this idea of what we want of a house. Some of us probably even thought of a commercial building. God, if we are going all the way, let's just go all the way. Just give me a commercial building as such. When I was asking for money, I was thinking more of like Pambazuka, Lotto, Shinda Maisha kind of money. 100 million in the bank, not 100 trillion from Zimbabwe. When I thought about a car, that's not what I had in mind. And many other times that we get to the place where we begin to feel like the things that I prayed for is not what God has given me. And we all have seasons in our lives when what you desired did not really turn out to be the thing that you wanted. Or what you thought was your answered prayer. Finally, you're about to celebrate and you're getting excited about it. Has turned out to be your biggest pain, or your biggest disappointment, or your biggest loss. You believe that this is the business deal that will get you out of the rat race. You believe that once I get into this business, I invest into this, I'm out. I'm now dining and whining with the rich people in this country. But it turned out to be the biggest mess in your life, the biggest disappointment. The shell is about to break yet. Because you invested in quail eggs. Okay? We've been in relationships that you thought, finally, he is the one or she is the one. And that now has become your biggest disappointment. In fact, your constant prayer right now has been, God, just erase that part of my life. Because I regret why I met that person. Am I speaking to somebody? You prayed fervently for a job and you thought that this is my dream job. It comes with the perks and the benefits, and you're excited and you're celebrating. But then it turns out to be that, you have the worst colleagues ever, or the worst boss. Or maybe when you get to the place where you're fired and you're wondering, I thought this is it. I prayed for this. I had the specifics. You prayed for your car and you paid it with your hard-earned money. And you gave it all, you prayed and you prayed fervently. But then maybe it was involved in an accident. And now it's written off. Let me go deeper. The marriage that you thought was made in heaven. In fact, when the two of you walked to each other at the aisle and you said those vows, declared those vows, you're like, this is it. Till death do us part. And death will happen when we are like 90, exchanging dentures, And you had these dreams and you are happy and excited. But then now that marriage has died and you go separate ways and you're like, God, we did everything by the book. What has happened now? And you feel like God set you up for failure. You finally thought that, your dad and mom are becoming better. They're becoming healthy. But every day, it's like they're getting worse and worse. And you're at the place where you're about to lose them. Or you have lost them. For the ladies, you're finally able to conceive. But then, you lose your child. And for some of us, it's not once. Not twice. Many times. So what happens? What happens when what seemed or felt like an answered prayer? You thought that this is my miracle. This is my blessing. Turns out to be your greatest pain point. The very miracle that you prayed for, and yet you believed God had answered. I mean, you prayed for it. You came to the church and the pastor prayed for you. In fact, even the pastor went to you back home, and they anointed your child. You know, we came to your office and we poured anointing oil and we blessed your business, and everything seemed like it was going well. You know, you've given yourself, you've poured of your sweat and blood into that company because you believe that God desires excellence of you, and you've given everything to this, but your life has turned out to be contrary to what you expected or what you thought it should be. And the question that we're trying to answer today, what happens when tragedy strikes and you lose the very thing that you thought was your blessing, the very thing that you believed God gave you? What happens when you're in that situation? When you've prayed for something for a very long time, but then the next thing that happens, it turns out to be completely different from what you expected. You know, if you're joining us for the very first time, you're joining this conversation that we are calling running on empty. What do you do? What do you do in your life when your faith begins to run low? What do you do when you run low on your trust in God? Or when you're faced with so many challenges in your life, and you get to the place where you're running out of options? And the first week, we found this lady, we encountered this lady whose life began very well, her and her husband. I mean, things were working out very well. They were blessing the society. They were blessed to be a blessing. And God was doing amazing stuff through them as a couple. But then in the midst of that, unfortunately, tragedy struck and she lost her husband. And not only that, in fact, we encountered her at the point in her life when she was about to lose even her 2 sons. Not only had she lost her husband, she had lost everything to debt. And then now she's about to lose her 2 sons, because I said that back then the law was if you owe anyone money and you haven't paid it back, then they are obligated to come and take your sons into slavery until the debt is paid. But then she encountered this man of God, the prophet Elisha. And Elisha has been sort of the main character in these stories that we're sharing throughout this month. And the thing that Elisha does is that he invites her to give God another opportunity, one more chance to move in her life. Because the only thing that she had left in her life was this little small jar of olive oil. And Elisha invites her to give that to God, and God uses that and multiplies it. And not only does she encounter God, but the thing that happens is that she has enough. She's able to get enough money to pay her debt, but also to save her sons and have enough to live on. And the lesson that we learned the first week was the little that you have could be all God needs. What is the little that you have? Some of us feel like, you know, we are at our end. But what is the little that you have that you can give God? Last week I introduced another lady. And this lady had a different story because she was a well-to-do woman. I mean, she was one of those people who, together, her and her husband, you know, they were accustomed to acts of generosity because of all the wealth that they had. And they were just good people. And they loved on people and they gave towards blessing the work of God. And it was only a matter of time before she noticed that the prophet Elisha passes through their town several times. And she invited him for a meal. But then after that, you know, she goes on. Her generosity doesn't stop there. She talks to her husband that they should build a room for Elisha so that every time Elisha will pass through their town, he can come and spend at their home. And Elisha was so moved by this woman's generosity that he felt that there's something that I must do for this couple. And of course, he calls her. And while she's in his presence, he asks her, what is the one thing that I can do for you? And we discover at this point that, you know what, she had this thing that we sort of called a no-go zone. You know, areas in our lives where we've prayed for something for so long and you've been disappointed so many times that you get to the place where you're like, you know what, I don't want to bring it up in any conversation, whether it is with my friends, with my family, or even with God. I don't want to bring up this situation to anyone because I am fearful of the fact that I might be disappointed one more time. But Elisha leans in and he's like, you know what? In a year's time, you are going to be blessed with a son. And that's what happens. And we say that despite your no-go zone, despite how many times you've been disappointed, the lesson was, don't let your circumstances limit your faith in God. So you find this story in the book of 2 Kings chapter 4. And I will encourage you, please go and when you go home, go and read the entire chapter 4 of 2 Kings. In fact, if you can even read from 1 Kings, you'll be able to understand the context of how the story of Elisha even comes about, because you begin with the story of Elijah, who was his mentor, and then you move into Elisha. Because we stopped at 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 17. But then I want us to continue the story, because we will continue with the story of this lady. In fact, I'm thinking the Shunammite woman. I'm thinking we can call her Mrs. S, just for easy referencing. The story continues, because from verse 17, we jump into verse 18, and that's where we pick up today. And in verse 18, you find that the difference between verse 17 and verse 18 is actually several years. Because verse 17, we stopped where the son was, she got the child, she was blessed, the prophecy came true. But then when you move to verse 18, we actually find out that the son has now grown up, and now is probably a more grown-up boy. And not only is he walking, but he also goes out to help his father and the workers out in the field. So he was a probably much older boy. So when you go into verse 18, we find that in one of those instances where in one of the mornings, he wakes up and he runs to the field and he's going to help his father and the workers. But then when he gets close to his father, he begins to shout, "My head, my head." And it seems like his head is hurting. And his father quickly responds and he says, he calls to one of the servants and he says, "Take him to his mom." Now, several reasons, he could have done that. Maybe, in fact, it say that back, in the Middle East, the sun could be extreme. It could get to extreme measures. So maybe he was saying, take him to his mother so that he can go and stay in the house and maybe even cool down. But probably, even just because of the nurturing spirit of mothers, he was like, take him to his mother so that even the mother can take care of him. We don't know yet, because the passage does not reveal that to us. But the servant quickly runs to and takes the son to the mom. And when the mom gets the son, she puts him on his lap. We don't know for how long they sat there. But the one thing that we know for sure is that after a couple of hours, we're told that around noontime, he died. Let me remind us. Let me remind us this story. That for many years, this is a woman who has held her son on her lap, and the son has died right before her eyes. For many years, she probably had prayed for this son. She probably had asked God for a miracle of a child for many years, but she waited for so long until she got so disappointed that she sort of put that in a no-go zone. She came up with this, she developed her no-go zone so that she avoids further disappointments in her life. Then one day, a prophet walks into her life and prophesies over her and says that you're going to have a child. True to that, a year later, she has a child. So I want you to begin to understand that this is not just a child to this woman, because she had waited for a very long time. This is a son. This is the heir for her husband. This is probably the one who's going to inherit their wealth. This is the person who's going to carry the family name and continue with the legacy that they began. For her, this was a sign of acceptance by the society. It was a sign that she had overcome the shame and the stigmatization that is brought about by barrenness. So she had overcome so many things to get to the place where she has a miracle. This wasn't just a mere blessing of provision. It wasn't just, okay, yeah, God, you've seen it fit to give me. It is something that she had waited for a very long time. But now, the miracle has died. Tragedy has happened right on her laps. Why would God want to give something and then take it away from me? Why would God want to bless me with one thing and then take it? Why does it feel like the blessing is no longer a blessing? You've been given something and the pain and the turmoil, you just feel like, this thing is no longer a blessing. If this was honestly God, if he was moving in my life, he's the one who gave me this child, wouldn't it have lasted for longer? Isn't this our story? Isn't this your story? For some of us, we are here and you identify with this woman and you remember. As I've said, you remember, maybe even you laid your hands on your womb and you felt your child, but then you lost. Some of us remember very well when you felt the hand of your loved one grow cold as they passed on right before your eyes. Some of us remember when the marriage that you prayed for deeply, and you remember seeing him walk out of those doors, knowing very well that he's never going to come back again. It may not be as grave for you, but there's a deep sense of loss that could be compared to that. You remember the auctioneers coming and taking away everything. If not, some of us are probably in that state where they are about to come and take away everything. And you feel that. The car that you bought with your hard-earned money, you dedicated even to God, poured anointing oil. And now you've lost it. Maybe it was involved in a nasty accident, written off. The scholarship that you thought you got and then it went to someone else. You know what I'm talking about, guys. I can go on and on giving you examples. You know what I'm talking about. You prayed for one thing. You believed that God is going to come through for you. And he did. Probably in a way he did. But then you got to a place where the blessing that you thought was yours, the miracle that you thought was yours, has now disappeared or is slipping through your hands. And the pain runs deep. And it seems like it is in times like this that we really feel like God has abandoned us. We really begin to doubt whether God really exists. In seasons where you feel like your blessings are leaving you is when we begin to run on completely empty. And we have absolutely no faith. We have absolutely no trust in God because the pain runs deep at times and it is unbearable. And how could the one who claims to be a loving father allow this to happen? How could be the one who has said that he's the father to the fatherless allow this to happen? How could he give me something and then take it away from me again? And we ask these questions, and they're legitimate questions. Isn't that just malicious that he can be able to do something like that? And some of us are here and you're in pain. And the reality is that many of us have gone through that season where you got something or someone and then you lost it. When you were just about to settle or just about to celebrate, and if you haven't gone through any kind of loss in your life, I don't want to be a prophet of doom. But Jesus Christ tells us that trouble is coming our way. The reality is that we, you and I, will go through some kind of loss at some point. So whether you've gone through it before or you haven't, this is just one of those messages that is relevant for all of us, regardless of which season you are in. My hope and prayer today is that as we look at what this woman does next, you and I will be encouraged to hope in God one more time. I am not here to promise you that your miracle will be restored. I am not here to tell you that your pain will completely disappear. I am not here to say that your loss shall be recovered. My prayer is that the healing process will begin. And that at the end of it all, we shall begin to hope in God one more time. And at the end of this message, my hope is that your tank will begin to be filled one more time. You know, I was drawn to Mrs. S.'s story because in the midst of loss and pain, she does several things that are unusual. I call them unusual because ordinarily, you and I will not do the things that she does next. I would like for us to sort of recount her steps and some of the choices that she made around that time. And then towards the end of the message, I'm sort of going to try and bring them together and point us towards one thing. Because guys, the child dies in her arms. This is catastrophic. The very person that she cared for, her flesh and blood, she has watched. I don't even know how long the child was there on her laps, but probably she watched him move from one level to a lower level to a lower level until he dies. Some of us would probably lose it if this was to happen to us today. You will probably go out wailing and screaming when something like this happens. So this is a very catastrophic thing that happens in her life. And you will expect that in a moment like this, she will panic. But look at what happens. In fact, let's go to verse 21. She carried him and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and left him there. Now, this is very interesting for you to note, because ideally, she should have taken him to start preparing his body for burial. But then what does she do? She carries him and takes him to the man of God's room and lays him there. And then what does she do? She shuts the door and leaves him there. Continue to the next verse. I'm going to rush through this passage. She sent a message to her husband. Send one of the servants and a donkey so that I can hurry to the man of God and come right back. You know, the interesting thing is that at her moment of desperation, she decides to go to the man of God. She decides to go to the prophet Elijah. And it seems to me that she was very clear on what she wanted to do. I mean, she picks her son, takes him to the room, locks the room, runs down, asks the husband to get a servant so that they can go to the man of God. And it looks like she knew what she wanted to do. And she runs to the man of God. She runs to the right place. Let me say something here and then I'm going to come back to it. But for many of us, whenever we are faced with a grave situation, the easier thing that we do is that we run out of church. We run away from God because we feel disappointed with God, and we run away from God and even the things of God. We choose to leave God and everything that concerns him. We stop coming to church. We stop attending life group. We stop reading the Bible. We stop praying because we don't want anything to do with God. But this woman does something very interesting. She chooses to run towards, when trouble comes, she chooses to run towards God. Why? Let's continue and we'll see. You see, friends, the thing is this: sooner or later, loss will come into our lives. Sooner or later, loss will come into our life. What will be your response? Let's go to the next verse, verse 25. As she approached the man of God, so of course she has gotten the donkey. The husband has given her the donkey, and this is a distance of about 25 miles. From Shunem all the way to Mount Carmel. And if I can just give you approximate, it's probably like from here to Thika town. So she's on a donkey, for all that distance. And then she gets to the mountain, and as soon as she approached the man of God on Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance, and he said to Gehazi, "Look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child?" Here's the interesting thing, and I love this part of the passage because Elisha was able to tell that there was something wrong with the woman. There must have been something wrong. And I want to encourage someone here that even the people who are sitting right next to you, they have absolutely probably no clue what is going on in your life. Even the people who you are probably living with, they don't even know the pain and the agony that you're going through. But I'm here to encourage you that God does know what it is that you're going through. That before you even tell him what it is, he already knows. And Elisha's picture is one of that. What Elisha does here. And we continue, because when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet. This was a sign of submission. Remember, this is a woman who has undergone tragedy. She's in pain. She's in agony. And then she comes and she submits herself to the man of God. And then Gehazi, the servant, began to push her away. But the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is deeply troubled. But the Lord has not told me what it is." I love that. Because it seems, you see, for me, Elisha had spent enough time with this woman to know her well. Because you remember, it probably was many years by now. Elisha used to stay at their house whenever he'll pass through the town of Shunem. Then she said, "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And did I say, don't deceive me and get my hopes up?" This is the woman. And she revisits her pain. She reminds the prophet Elijah about the fact that this is not what I had asked for. Okay? She takes her disappointment to the man of God. She takes it to the right place, and immediately Elisha responded. And when you read on the story, you find that they started heading back home. And I'm going to tell you what happens next. I look at the story of Mrs. S. I look at the story of this woman, and I ask myself, And I really pray, Holy Spirit, I just pray that you'll speak to someone here today who will understand this. Because I ask myself that in the midst of all the pain, in the midst of this great loss, what could we learn from her? What do we do when your miracle, in fact, let me say, what do you do when your miracle dies? What do you do when the thing that you treasure the most, you begin to lose it? And the one thing that stands out for me is that her character in faith was very consistent before her miracle and after her miracle. And the question that I want to ask you today is this, and we're going to struggle with this question. Will the character of your faith carry you through your tragedy? She is a woman who invited the prophet and took care of him. She wasn't doing this to gain something from him. She was doing it purely out of an act of love. Remember, this couple, they were accustomed to acts of generosity and hospitality, and they used this to bless others. She did it out of love and compassion. She shared a meal with the prophet. She built a room for him, and she went on and on. She understood that she was blessed to be a blessing, and she took care of God's things. And when all seemed well, when everything was working out, remember even when Elisha asks her, what do you want? What was her response? It was the one of humility, that I am content. I don't need anything else. When everything else seemed like it was working out perfectly for her, before her miracle, she kept God close. She was concerned by the things of God. She invited God into her space because she was so content with all that she had. And she just loved God. When tragedy strikes, my friends, and her son dies, it is her character in faith, her past experiences, her relationship with God, even through the prophet Elijah, that guides her on what she needs to do. I really hope someone is understanding this. The substance of her faith, the substance of her life is what carries her through and gave her the focus to know what to do and where to go. Many of us, whenever we're in pain, we don't even know what to do. When her son dies, guys, when you read that chapter, when you read that verse, when her son dies, it is worth appreciating her positive response. Because she had this unusual, weird calmness and focus about her. It is interesting how she knew what to do, when to do, and how to do it. Because she quickly took this boy upstairs, ran down, got the servant, got the donkey, ran to the man of God. And for some of us, whenever we are in pain and agony, we feel like we're confused, like we're in a daze. We don't even know what to do. We're in pain. I'm not negating the fact that probably she was deep in pain, but she knew what to do. She did not let what happened to her affect what was inside of her. And I ask you the question today, will the character of your faith carry you through your tragedy? You see, when we lose something or when we lose someone, we do one of two things. The first thing that we do is that we begin to question God and His sovereignty. We begin to doubt God and we wonder whether He really exists. In fact, we even move away from the things of God. We stop coming to church, as I said, and we stop even praying. We stop even reading His word, and we continue in life. We stop going for life group because we don't even want anything to do with church people or God's people. And then the second thing that we do is that we begin to believe that there's something wrong with us. Otherwise, if there was nothing wrong with us, this will not happen. We begin to judge ourselves harshly. Could it be that I have done something wrong? Could it be that my family has done something wrong? That's why we are going through this. But for Mrs. S, she doesn't run away. Instead, she runs towards God. She did have an option, remember. She did have an option to be extremely disappointed. Because you remember very well, she didn't really ask for this son. She had gotten to the place where she was so content and she was like, let's move on. In fact, let's make do with what we had. But somehow God insisted on blessing her. And now that He has blessed her, He has taken her child again. Mavuno, this is what I want to do today. I am calling us to a deeper faith. This is probably not kids stuff. This is grown-up stuff that we're talking about here. This is grown-up faith that we're talking about here. What will carry you through your tragedy or your loss? It is not just the songs that we sing here. You can't live this journey. You can't walk this journey depending on only coming here and enjoying the music that Riga and his team blesses us with. You can't depend on concerts and events. You can't just depend on inspirational books that we read and we think that that is what is going to carry us through our pain and our agony. No. What is the character of your faith? How are we building our faith in God? How are we building our trust in Him? Because that is what is going to carry us. Look at this woman. When everything was going well, she was involved in the things of God. She was connected to God through the prophet Elisha. And even when the tragedy strikes, you see the consistency. She doesn't run away, she runs towards God. Let me give you an illustration. You see, I may be comparing apples and oranges here, but financial advisors and those who teach about money will often tell you that you always need to ensure that you have an emergency fund. Now, most of us are familiar with emergency fund, and they tell you that you need to prepare and save some money aside for a rainy day, because a rainy day will come where you might lose your job, lose a business, or things will just be thick, or someone will fall sick. And they recommend that you should put aside at least 3 months of your monthly expenses. At least. I know many of us probably have even done more than that. I want to say to us that the same principle applies. That we need to invest in our faith because we know a rainy day is going to come. We need to begin to build our faith in God, our trust in God, because the day of trouble is going to come. I'm not a prophet of doom. Read your Bible. It is there. You will lose something or someone. Death is definite. But how are you preparing yourself for that? How are we preparing ourselves for that? We need to spend time with God. We need to read His Word. Find out what the Word says about Him, what the Word says about us. Mrs. S had invested in her time with God through His servant Elisha. She opened her home to the man of God. And I wonder, while she opened her home to the man of God, I wonder about the many lessons that Elisha had taught her. Probably the many stories he shared with her about his mentor Elijah. Because remember, Elijah was there before. Or the things that God had done for the nation of Israel. Maybe he heard that God had parted the waters. Maybe she heard that, that God had brought down walls of the enemy. That God had slayed giants and delivered His people into the promised land from captivity. Maybe she heard all these amazing stories. Maybe she must have heard the stories of how God's character doesn't change. That from the days of their forefathers, that God has consistently cared for His people and blessed His people. And she knew that if the same God was so concerned about blessing me with my unmet need, then the same God whose character doesn't change must be concerned about my pain of losing the same child. And maybe she heard these stories from Elisha. Maybe she heard these stories from other people. She was involved in the things of God. And maybe that gave her hope. That when tragedy struck her home, she did not hesitate. She knew where to run to. She knew where the solutions will come from. It will not come from her own strength. It will not come from her husband. It will not even come from the people around. It will come from God. Because she had built her faith. She had invested in her faith. Will the character of your faith carry you through your tragedy? The ending of this story is one that, we are told that Elisha goes and it's a wonderful story that the son is resurrected. And that's a happy ending. But that is probably not the case for all of us. That probably will not be the case for all of us. We may not be able to get everything that we have lost. We may never get back the people that we have lost. But I am here to encourage you that when your miracle dies, when you lose everything that you have, everything that is important to you, it is the character of your faith that will carry you through. How are you building your faith? I really need to end this message. How are you investing in your faith? I want to share a few things that you can do. Guys, show up in church. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing the Some of us, and allow me to rebuke you on this, some of us come to church sporadically, or even if not church, you engage in the things of God sporadically in your life. Then when tragedy strikes, you blame God. When things happen in your life, you begin to blame God. Quickly, just draw out your phone and get out the calculator. I want to show you something. Get your calculator. If it doesn't have a calculator, you can borrow your neighbor's. I want you to multiply 365 times 24. Okay, what's the answer? 8,000? 8,760, okay? Mark that word. Now I want you to multiply 52 times, let's say 2 hours. 52 times 2. What's the answer? Okay, I want you to divide 1 of 4. Divide 1 of 4 with 8 by 8,700 and. What's the answer? No, not 8,000 divided by it's 0.01. Majority of us give God 0.01 of our lives. And then when stuff happens, you blame him. Come on, guys. We come to church for 2 hours every week and we're happy. And then when stuff happens, and I'm asking you guys, how are you investing? Some of us spend time reading books on money, investments, on how to buy plots. But we don't spend time in God's word, reading the scriptures, because the minute you continue to read the word of God, it expands your memory. And you begin to understand the promises of God. You begin to understand who God is and who you are in God's eyes. And when these things begin to permeate your heart and your mind, then your faith takes root. Your trust in God takes root. Who are the people that you're hanging out with? Who is the community around you? Are they men and women who inspire your faith? Or are they men and women who are taking you far and far away from God? Because I put it to us that we will go through stuff in life. But who are the people that we are walking with? Are they inspiring us towards God? And that's why I'll ask you, will the character of your faith carry you through your tragedy? You see, friends, I would love to stand here and tell you that there's a formula that will take all your pain away. I would love to do that. Or protect you, or protect us. You know, if we did this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, we can be able to stay away from pain or from loss, encountering loss in our life. But that is not true to God's word. That would be a lie. That would be some form of false religion. Because here's the thing, religion looks for what works, what we can be able to see or hear. You know, that kind of religion is not patient to understand the ways of God. And that's why many people are living Christianity, because they're like, I can't see this, I can't understand this, I'm not even sure how this thing is going. But here's the thing, faith shows the reality of what we hope for, and is the evidence of the things that we cannot see. Friends, do not create your own measuring stick, such that when things do not work your way, you begin to doubt and you begin to question God whether things are working. Because that is a false religion. That is a spirit of error. Because our God is sovereign. I want us to get into a time of prayer, and I want you to understand this, that the fundamental fact of existence is that trust in God, that faith in God is the firm foundation of everything that makes life worth living. That faith that we have, that trust in God, that is the firm foundation that you can be able to stand on, because under it everything that makes life worth living. It is our handle for the things that we cannot see. It is our handle for the things that we cannot be able to understand. Our faith in God and our trust in God. Will the character of your faith carry you through your tragedy? I want to invite you into a time of prayer. And I want you to rise to your feet. I don't know what pain, what disappointment, what loss you've gone through. I want you to lay everything to God. I love the fact that this lady, Mrs. S, runs to the prophet Elisha. And she doesn't hesitate. She revisits her pain and declares her disappointment. And I want to invite you to declare, whether it's disappointment that you have, whether it's pain that you feel, declare it to God. Connect deep inside your heart and unveil those things, reveal those things to God. He knows that they're already there, so don't clam up. But just lay everything at God's feet and invite Him to come and take control. Invite Him to have His way, because He's our God. And then at the end, we're going to pray that God will give us the kind of faith that even when tragedy strikes, we will know what to do.